Hey, what's going on everyone? Vasco here. And as you may know, for the next season of Formula 1 in 2023, some rules are going to be introduced to mitigate the issues caused by porpoising and bouncing. But what changes are going to be implemented and how will they affect the cars and the current running order? Well, in this video we are going to talk all about it. Let's do this. So porpoising is caused by the aerodynamic bouncing of the car, whereas the bouncing effect we are seeing is caused by the suspension. So beginning with porpoising, it was especially apparent at Baku in the beginning of the season, where I saw that video of Lewis Hamilton getting out of the car with his hands in his back, barely being able to get out of the car, and that was the point when we realized that porpoising was putting drivers at risk and hurting their health, not only in a physical sense but also in a mind sense, because having your brain go up and down at that speed cannot be good for your brain. So this, combined with the fact that the tire loads were greater than expected and that the aerodynamic bouncing could be hurting the car's reliability, forced the FIA to intervene. So for 2023, rules regarding the floor are going to be adapted in order to reduce bouncing as much as possible, as well as new metrics that are going to be introduced to make sure that the problem doesn't occur. Now, even though most teams have already fixed bouncing, it happens here and there, and we see drivers complaining mostly after free practice sessions, so the FIA really needs to intervene in order to fix it. But how they are going to do this, it's very interesting. So right now let's take a look at the measures that are going to be implemented in 2023 to not only fix porpoising, but to increase the safety of the cars. Okay, so I've got an article here from motorsport.com where you can really see what is going to happen with the floor of the car. So firstly, the floor edges. So this section right here of the car, which you can see on my screen right now, is going to be one of the most severely affected structures in the entirety of the car for the 2023 rules. So the edges of the floor and the Venturi tunnels were raised by 15 millimeters, and now the maximum allowed deflection is 5 millimeters under a 200 Newton load, which is going to be applied in the middle and in the outer edge of the floor during the FIA scrutineering tests at the beginning of each weekend. Now, before, the deflections were 8 and 12 millimeters depending on the direction of the deflection, so meaning that it could go up to 8 millimeters up and 12 millimeters down. Now it's 5 for both directions. Now this is the main measure that's going to be introduced to fight porpoising, so allow me to explain how it works. So you can see here a ground effect car such as the 2022 Formula 1 cars. They work by having this section of the floor right here, and they want to have this section as higher up as they could with this section as low down as possible. Now these cars work with the Venturi tunnels, which are these structures right here, where you have a throat of the floor, which is basically a section underneath the car in the middle of the car where the floor is at its lowest. Now, by the fact that the car has a diffuser where the area is big on the back and a mouth where the area on the front is also big, but then having a throat underneath the car, which is forcing that airflow to go for a narrower section, what's going to happen is that in that narrower section, the airflow is going to speed up, and that in turn generates downforce. So this uses the Bernoulli effect in order to generate downforce, and is one of the very interesting ways in which the 2022 cars are completely different from the previous regulation. Now you can imagine that if the air is speeding up, you really want to put it to go to the diffuser in order for it to expand again and slow down in order to generate the maximum difference in pressure underneath the car. Now, if the airflow is able to escape down the sides, you basically lose all of the downforce, and this is what happened to Carlos Sainz after his damage in the Dutch Grand Prix after contact with Lewis Hamilton. You can see right here that even a small bit of damage in the side of the floor really ruined his race. Now you can see right here in this picture by Giorgio Piola, you see that by having these floor edges as low as possible, you are making sure that all of the air goes into this section right here, which is the Venturi Tunnel. Now for 2023, the cars are going to keep the plank, this part right here, at the same height, but the entrance to the tunnels and the floor edges are going to be bumped by 15 millimeters. Now what this will mean is that the cars are going to produce less downforce, as the ground effect won't be able to seal the floor as well. But the fact that the floor edges are now more raised means that a lot of the airflow is able to escape down the sides, and therefore the cars will produce less porpoising. Now the fact that porpoising works is that as the car gets loaded and loaded with downforce as the speed builds up, the car would touch the ground, and then once the car touches the ground, all of the downforce caused in the Venturi tunnels will suddenly stop, and then the car would be bouncing again up. So by making sure that the throat of the Venturi tunnels and that the floor edges don't touch the ground, you're effectively maintaining a situation where the downforce is never going away, so the car is just going to get lower down to the ground, but then you're not going to have that effect where it bounces up, then down, then up, then down. It's just going to stay low. So these cars might have less downforce than their 2022 counterparts, but they may have a lot more efficient aerodynamics and much better reliability because the cars are not going to be hitting the ground as often. Now, in order to make sure that the cars aren't porpoising at a level that will put the drivers at risk, a new technical directive has been introduced with a vertical acceleration sensor that's put right beneath the driver, and this is called AOM, so Aerodynamic Oscillation Metric. Now, even with these new rules, teams will need to make sure that the vertical oscillation of the car doesn't get past this metric, or else they will be forced to change their setups. Now, does this mean that porpoising will be impossible for 2023? No, because the cars are going to have the same ground effect properties as the 2022 cars, and depending on setup and possible loopholes, porpoising can happen again. It's just going to be much tougher to generate. Okay, and the other big rules change that's going to happen for 2023 is the roll hoop. So following that big crash at Silverstone, which you can see on your screen right now because thankfully Zhou Guanyu is okay, changes were introduced to the roll hoop, banning the Alfa Romeo spike style roll hoop and increasing the height of the roll hoop and its impact resistance to 15 Gs. So now it was 9 Gs, it will be 15 Gs, so a much tougher roll hoop will be introduced. And also the fact that Alfa Romeo had a spike on its roll hoop means that the car would, as it happened with Zhou Guanyu, get stuck in the ground once the car started rolling. So now it will be mandated that the car has a smooth roll hoop on the top of the car, such as the one that Red Bull is using right now. So Alfa Romeo will need to change their roll hoop design, and all of the teams will need to make sure that they will be able to withstand a crash that's at least 50% more strong than what Zhou sustained in the British Grand Prix. So thankfully Zhou was okay, but for 2023 expect that the roll hoops will be much tougher to avoid it breaking off, such as it did in Zhou's crash, and meaning that the drivers will be safer even if it comes at the cost of the cars getting just a little bit heavier. But what effects are these rules going to have on the car's performance? Well, there's no doubt that the cars are going to be slower by about 1 or 2 tenths in the beginning of the season, but that's not the biggest effect that you're going to see. So teams such as Red Bull have a massive advantage right now because they were able to control porpoising even with the current regulations since the beginning of the season. So you're basically removing a key advantage of Red Bull, which is that they have a car that's able to produce all of that downforce under the current regulations with the porpoising rules not yet in place. But the team that's going to lose the most, in my opinion, is Mercedes. So Mercedes is a team that really needs to have that car as glued to the ground as possible, and you can see a comparison between Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull. You can see that Mercedes has a faster car once the car is really glued to the ground with those floor edges. So by raising everything, Mercedes is going to be one of the teams that's going to be the most affected. And this is why Toto Wolff and Mercedes were fighting against this rule. So they were one of the teams that were pushing for a change in rules due to porpoising. But then that came around to bite them because now they are going to be one of the most affected teams. So don't expect a fundamental change in the pecking order, but expect teams such as Red Bull and Mercedes to lose a little bit of their advantage, and hopefully this will narrow the field spread a little bit, meaning that teams at the bottom of the grid and at the top of the grid will be able to be a little bit closer on track. And when it comes to the safety changes regarding the roll hoop, I think that any change when it comes to safety is a very good upgrade, and I think that by them noticing and learning from these crashes, Formula 1 is going to become a much safer sport. And even if nothing happened in the Zhou crash, I think that Formula 1 could be a little bit safer in the roll hoop department. So we are learning from a crash where nobody got hurt, but thankfully we are still learning, we are still improving, and this is what I want Formula 1 to keep doing. So in my opinion, this is our positive news for 2023. The pecking order is going to change. The cars are not going to look so unprofessional with the bouncing effect, and everything is going to get fixed. So I'm very excited to see what these 2023 regulations are going to bring to the table, but there's still a lot of room for innovation this season. So this weekend we are going to see the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, where we see those skinny rear wings at cars. But why are they there? Well, you can find out all about it in this video right here, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye!